I need your deck.
When creating a series on underrated movies, a bit of a conundrum arises. Where to start? Well, I struggled with that decision, but I kept coming back to Ridley Scott's 1982 science fiction noir, Blade Runner. I'll admit, it's hard to call it underrated anymore. In fact, calling it anything other than one of the greatest films of all time might just get your head ripped off in some circles. But look, it's one of my favorite movies, and it's my damn playlist, and you're not even my real dad. Sorry, wrong video. Anyway, what might surprise you is that this film wasn't always destined for glory. In fact, it was a production nightmare, a box office flop, and Harrison Ford sounds like he'd rather be gouging his eyes out with a spoon. So how did this existential crisis of a movie go from flop to cult classic? Why is it regarded as one of the best movies ever made? And how many times do you have to watch it to figure out what the hell is going on? These, dear viewer, are the questions we'll be tackling in today's episode of Strangers' Picks. With that out of the way, let's get this show on the road, shall we? Blade Runner is based on the 1968 novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, a title that's absurdly long and fittingly trippy for the story it tells. The director, one Ridley Scott, was fresh off of Alien, and the studio wanted a crowd pleaser, a space action thriller, something that could cash in on Star Wars mania. Instead, Scott gave them a slow burn film noir about the human condition, drenching it in synths, gloomy atmospheres, and more neon than a Vegas strip club. Well, it turns out that marketing is pretty important for film releases, and when your audience rocks up expecting Spice Girls and you give them Kraftwerk, let's just say the response was tepid. Critics didn't really know what to do with it, and soon enough, everyone was too distracted by E.T. to really care anyway. And so, it became a stealth killer, a movie that would take a decade to be fully appreciated for its incredible soundtrack, genre-defining world-building, and unparalleled depth. The story goes something like this. Rick Deckard is a washed-up Blade Runner, a sort of cop whose job it is to hunt down and retire rogue replicants. What the hell is a replicant? Well, they're sort of artificial humans, Terminator-style robots used as slave labor in space colonies, kind of like if ChatGPT could work a shovel. These replicants aren't just your run-of-the-mill machines, they're stronger, faster, and potentially smarter than regular humans, which makes them both incredibly useful and fucking terrifying. The trouble starts when a group of these replicants decides they've had enough of working the interplanetary graveyard shift and escapes back to Earth. Led by Roy Batty, a particularly powerful replicant with a penchant for existential angst, they embark on a mission to confront their creator and demand a little thing called not dying. Apparently, the 4-year expiration date on their model wasn't quite doing it for them. Deckard, whose enthusiasm for the job ranks somewhere alongside filing taxes, is dragged into the fold to take out this rebellious bunch before they make too much of a mess. After Deckard reluctantly agrees to the job, his first stop is the Tyrell Corporation, the tech giant responsible for creating these replicants. Here he finds Rachel, a replicant so advanced that she doesn't even know she's not human. This leads to a cybernetic romance subplot between the two, raising questions about what it means to love and whether first base with a replicant counts. But there's no time for feelings, because Deckard's got replicants to retire. First up is Zora, a replicant working as an exotic dancer, because of course she is. Deckard tracks her down, resulting in a tense chase through the rain-soaked streets of dystopian LA. After the chase, Deckard finally takes her out, shooting her in the back as she crashes through a series of glass windows in a scene that will be met with pitchforks and burning torches if it were made today. The film pulls absolutely no punches in making us question who the real bad guy is, casting doubt over the morality of Deckard's mission as a whole. Next on Deckard's hit list are the remaining replicants, Preece, who's on a creepy doll meets killer robot vibe, and Roy Batty, our poetic antagonist. Preece is shacked up with a lonely genetic engineer who helps create replicants and lives with a bunch of these weird little guys. Okay. Preece tries to kill Deckard in one of the weirdest fight scenes ever. After a brief but brutal struggle, Deckard manages to retire her as well, but not before she leaves an impression. This brings us to the final showdown, the supreme ordeal in Deckard's journey. Roy Batty isn't just the most powerful replicant, he's on a mission for meaning, and he's not going to go down quietly. The fight between Deckard and Batty is less of a brawl and more of an unsettling game of psychological cat and mouse. At one point, Batty even lets Deckard go, just so the chase can continue, which somehow makes him even more terrifying. As Batty's 4-year lifespan reaches its final moments, the film flips the script. Instead of killing Deckard, Batty saves him, pulling him up from the edge of a rooftop just as he's about to fall from his death. And then we get perhaps the greatest monologue in the history of storytelling, the Tears in Rain speech.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Batty reflects on his brief, violent, and ultimately tragic existence. He tries to explain to Deckard and to himself why his life has meaning, falling back on his experiences, the incredible things he's seen and the memories he's made. It's deep, it's profound, and it almost makes you forget that he was trying to murder Deckard 5 minutes earlier. As Batty dies, Deckard's left to contemplate the thin line between human and not. And if by this stage you haven't felt shivers, well, I have some bad news for you on that front. Now, let's not get carried away. Blade Runner has its flaws and they're hard to ignore. The pacing, for one, is glacial. Scott's obsession with atmosphere is great for world building, but comes at the expense of momentum. It's a moody, atmospheric noir, but there are moments where you wish anything would happen. Harrison Ford's performance as Deckard is, subtle. His grumbling, disinterested vibe can come off as wooden, but in the context of the film's themes, it kind of works. For all its flaws, Blade Runner remains a masterpiece in large part due to the world it creates. Scott's vision of a rain-soaked, neon-lit dystopian Los Angeles is one of the most iconic settings in sci-fi history, influencing everything from The Matrix to Ghost in the Shell. The film practically invented the cyberpunk aesthetic, a grim future where technology and humanity blur together in a stew of moral ambiguity. But this is where Blade Runner really excels. On the surface, it's a chase movie, but beneath the neon haze, it's a deep dive into the question of what it means to be human. The replicants are programmed with an expiration date, 4 years to live, and as they approach the end, they become obsessed with their mortality. Sound familiar? The replicants, in their desperate search for more life, mirror the human condition better than any of the humans in the actual film. Roy Batty, in particular, embodies this struggle. He's more than a rogue machine, he's an archetypal figure straight out of myth, a modern Prometheus who confronts his creator to demand answers. When Batty meets Tyrell, it's not just an act of rebellion, it's an act of divine defiance. Batty isn't asking for a longer warranty, he's demanding the right to live on his own terms. And when Tyrell brushes him off with platitudes, Batty's violence feels almost justified, an archetypal revolt against a cruel, indifferent god. Deckard, by contrast, is the human who's lost touch with his humanity. His emotional detachment throughout most of the film seems less like bad acting and more like a deliberate choice. Deckard might be a replicant himself, depending on which version of the film you watch. If he's human, he's apathetic. If he's a replicant, he's a tragic figure blindly following orders to destroy his own kind without even realizing it. Either way, he's the film's embodiment of ennui, stuck in the cycle of violence and routine, indifferent to the larger questions that plague Batty. At its heart, Blade Runner is about the search for meaning in a world that doesn't care. Roy Batty's final act, saving Deckard's life even as his own is slipping away, is the ultimate expression of humanity. In the end, the irony is that the beings created to be less than human turn out to embody the best aspects of us. So what's the takeaway? Well, Blade Runner isn't a film that everyone will love. Hell, not everyone even likes it. But it's a film that lingers. It asks questions that most blockbusters are too afraid to touch. And even if it doesn't always succeed, it leaves you thinking long after the credits roll. It's slow, it's dark, it has some average performances, but beneath the surface, it's a profound meditation on mortality, identity, and the human condition. It's a movie that demands to be seen and thought about. Anyway, that's all I've got. If you want more on how to tell a good story, check out my other videos. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.